Hello, chapter book friends. Today we're continuing The Magician's Elephant. So here we go. Chapter 3. The chief of police of the city of Baltis was a man who believed most firmly in the letter of the law. However, despite repeated and increasingly flustered consultations of the police handbook, he could not find one word, one syllable, one letter that pertained to the correct method of dealing with a beast that has appeared out of nowhere, destroying the roof of an opera house and crippling a noblewoman. And so, with great reluctance, the chief of police solicited the opinions of his subordinates about what should be done with the elephant. "Sir," said one of the young sergeants, "she appeared. Perhaps if we are patient, she will disappear." "Does the elephant appear as if she might disappear?" said the chief of police. "Sir," said the young sergeant, "I am afraid I don't understand the question, sir." "I am quite aware of your lack of understanding," said the chief. "Your lack of understanding is as apparent as the elephant, and is even more unlikely to disappear." "Yes, sir," said the sergeant. He furrowed his brow. He thought for a moment. "Thank you, sir. I'm sure." This exchange was followed by a long and painful silence. The gathered policemen shuffled their feet. "It is simple," said another policeman finally. "The elephant is a criminal. Therefore, she must be tried as a criminal and punished as a criminal." "But why is the elephant a criminal?" said a small policeman with a very large mustache. "Why is the elephant a criminal?" said the police chief. "Yes," said the small policeman, whose name was Leo Matien. "Why? If the magician threw a rock at a window, would you then blame the rock for the window breaking?" "What kind of a magician throws rocks?" said the chief of police. "What kind of sorry excuse for magic is that, the throwing of rocks?" You misunderstand me, sir," said Leo Matine. "I mean only to say that the elephant did not ask to come crashing through the roof of the opera house. Would any sensible elephant wish for such a thing? And if she did not wish for it, then how can she be guilty of it?" "I ask you for possible solutions," said the chief of police. He put his hands on top of his head. "Yes," said Leo Matien. "I ask what action should be taken," said the chief. He pulled at his hair with both hands. "Yes," said Leo Matien again. "And you talk to me about sensible elephants and what they wish for," shouted the captain. "I think it is pertinent, sir," said Leo Matien. "He thinks it is pertinent," said the chief. "He thinks it is pertinent." He pulled at his hair again. His face became very red. "Sir," said another policeman, "what if we found the elephant a home, sir?" "Yes," said the chief of police. He turned around and faced the policeman who had just spoken. "Why did I not think of that? Let us dispatch the elephant immediately to the home for wayward elephants who engage in objectionable pursuits against their will. It is right down the street, is it not?" "Is it?" said the policeman. "Truly, I had not known. There are so many worthy charitable institutions in this enlightened age. Why, it's become nearly impossible to keep track of them all." The chief pulled very hard on his hair. "Leave me," he said softly, "all of you. I will solve this without your help." One by one the policemen left the police station. The small policeman was the last to go. He lifted his hat to the chief. "I wish you a good evening, sir," he said, "and I beg that you consider the idea that the elephant is guilty of nothing except being an elephant." "Leave me," said the chief of police. "Please." "Good evening, sir," said Leo Matien. Again, good evening. The small policeman walked home in the gloom of early evening. As he walked, he whistled a sad song and considered the fate of the elephant. To his mind, the chief was asking the wrong questions. The questions that mattered, the questions that needed to be asked, were these. Where did the elephant come from? And what did it mean that she had come to the city of Baltis? What if she was just the first in a series of elephants? What if, one by one, all the mammals and reptiles of Africa were to be summoned to the stages of opera houses all across Europe? What if, next, crocodiles and giraffes and rhinoceroses came crashing through the roofs? Leo Matien had the soul of a poet, and because of this he liked very much to consider questions that had no answers. He liked to ask what if and why not, and could it possibly be? Leo came to the top of the hill and paused. Below him, The lamplighter was lighting the lamps that lined the wide avenue. Liu Metian stood and watched as one by one the globes sprang to life. What if the elephant had come bearing a message of great importance? What if everything was to be irrevocably, undeniably changed by the elephant's arrival? Leo stood at the top of the hill and waited for a long while, until the avenue below him was well and fully lit, and then he continued walking down the hill and onto the lighted path towards his home. He whistled as he walked. What if, why not, could it be, sang the glowing, wondering heart of Leo Metienne. What if, why not, could it be? Peter stood at the window of the attic room of the apartment's polonaise. He heard Leo Metienne before he saw him, always because of the whistling. Peter heard Leo before he saw him. He waited until the policeman appeared, and then he threw open the window and stuck his head out. He shouted, "Leo Metienne, is it true that there is an elephant, and that she came through the roof, and that she is now with the police?" Leo stopped. He looked up. "Peter," he said. He smiled. "Peter Augustus Duquesne, fellow residents of the apartment's polonaise, little cuckoo bird of the attic world. There is, indeed, an elephant. It is true. And it is true also that she is in the custody of the police. The elephant is imprisoned." "Where?" said Peter. "I cannot say," said Leo Metienne. "I cannot say because I am afraid that I do not know. They are keeping it the strictest possible secret, you see. What with elephants being such dangerous and provoking criminals." "Close the window," called Vilna Lutz from his bed. "It is winter, and it is cold." It was winter, true. And true also it was quite cold. But even in the summertime, Vilna Lutz, when he was in the grip of his strange fever, would complain of the cold and demand that the windows be shut. "Thank you," said Peter to Leo Metienne. He closed the window and turned and faced the old man. "What were you speaking of?" said Vilna Lutz. "What manner of nonsense were you shouting from the windows?" "An elephant, sir," said Peter. "It is true. Leo Metienne says that it is true. An elephant has arrived. An elephant is here." "Elephants?" said Vilna Lutz. "Pooh! Imaginary beasts, denizens of bestiaries, demons from who knows where." He fell back against the pillow, exhausted by his diatribe, and then jerked suddenly upright again. "Hark! Do I hear the crack of muskets, the boom of cannon?" "No, sir," said Peter, "you do not." "Demons, elephants, imaginary beasts." "Not imaginary," said Peter. "Real. This elephant is real. Leo Metienne is an officer of the law, and he says that it is so." "Pooh!" said Vilna Lutz. "I say pooh to that mustachioed officer of the law and his imagined creature." He lay back against the pillow. He turned his head first to one side and then the other. "I hear it," he said. "I hear the sounds of battle. The fight has begun." "So," said Peter softly to himself, "it must be true, mustn't it? There is an elephant now, so the fortune-teller was right, and my sister lives." "Your sister," said Vilna Lutz. "Your sister is dead. How often must I tell you? She never drew breath. She did not breathe. They are all dead. Look out over the field, and you will see they are all dead, your father among them. Look, look, your father lies dead." "I see," said Peter. "Where is my foot?" said Vilna Lutz. He cast a wild look around the room. "Where is it?" "On the bedside table." "On the bedside table, sir," corrected Vilna Lutz. "On the bedside table, sir," said Peter. "There," said the old soldier. He picked up the foot. "There, there, old friend." He gave the wooden foot a loving pat, and then let his head sink back on the pillow. He pulled the blankets up under his chin. "Soon," he said, "soon I will put on the foot. Private Duquesne, and we will practice maneuvers, you and I. We will make a great soldier out of you yet. You will become a man like your father. You will become, like him, a soldier brave and true." Peter turned away from Vilna Lutz and looked out the window at the darkening world. Downstairs, far below, a door slammed, and then another. He heard the muffled sound of laughter, and he knew that Leo Metienne was being welcomed home by his wife. What was it like, Peter wondered, to have someone who knew you would always return, and who welcomed you with open arms? He remembered being in a garden at dusk. The sky was purple, and the lamps had been lit, and Peter was small. His father picked him up and tossed him high and then caught him over and over again. Peter's mother was there too. She was wearing a white dress that glowed bright in the purple dusk, and her stomach was large like a balloon. "Don't drop him," said Peter's mother to his father. "Don't you dare drop him." She was laughing. "I will not," said his father. "I could not, for he is Peter Augustus Dukeen, and he will always return to me." Again and again, Peter's father threw him up in the air. Again and again, Peter felt himself suspended into nothingness for a moment, just a moment, and then he was pulled back, returned to the sweetness of the earth and the warmth of his father's waiting arms. "See," said his father to his mother, "do you see? He always comes back to me." It was fully dark now in the attic room of the apartment's polonaise. The old soldier tossed from side to side in the bed. "Close the window," he said. "It's winter and it's cold." The garden that held Peter's father and mother seemed far away, so far that he could almost believe that the memory, the garden, had existed in another world entirely. But if the fortune-teller was to be believed, and she must be believed, she must, he thought, the elephant knew that the way to that garden, she could lead him there. "Please," said Vilna Lutz, "the window must be closed. It's so cold. It's so very, very cold." Chapter 4. That winter, the winter of the elephant, was for the city of Baltis a particularly miserable season. The skies were filled with thick, lowering clouds that obscured the sun and condemned the city to a series of days that resembled nothing so much as a single, unending dusk. It was unimaginably, unbelievably cold. Darkness prevailed. The crippled Madame Lavon, sunk deep in a gloom of her own, took to visiting the prison. She came in the late afternoon. The magician could hear the accusing creak of the wheels of her chair as it was pushed down the long corridor. Yet, when the noblewoman appeared before him, her eyes wide and pleading, a blanket thrown over her useless legs, and her manservant standing to attention behind her, the magician managed somehow each time to be astonished at her presence. Madame Lavon spoke to the magician. She said, "But perhaps you do not understand. I was crippled by an elephant that came through the roof." The magician responded. He said, "Madame Lavon, I assure you I intended only lilies. I intended only a bouquet of lilies." Every day the magician and the noblewoman spoke to each other with an urgency that belied the fact that they had spoken the same words the day before and the day before. Every afternoon, the magician and Madame Lavon faced each other in the gloom of the prison and said exactly the same thing. The noblewoman's manservant was named Hans Ickman, and he had been in the service of Madame Lavon since he was a child. He was her adviser and confidant, and she trusted him in all things. Before he came to serve Madame Lavon, however, Hans Ickman had lived in a small town in the mountains, and he had there a family. Brothers, a mother, and a father, and a dog, who was famous for being able to leap across the river that ran through the woods beyond the town. The river was too wide for Hans Ickman and his brothers to leap across. It was too wide for even a grown man to leap. But the dog took a running jump and sailed effortlessly across the water. She was a white dog and small, and other than her ability to jump the river, she was in no way extraordinary. Hans Ickman, as he aged, had forgotten about the dog entirely. Her miraculous ability had receded to the back of his mind. But the night the elephant had come crashing through the ceiling of the opera house, the manservant had remembered again, for the first time in a long while, the little white dog. Standing in the prison, listening to the endless and unvarying exchange between Madame Lavon and the magician, Hans Ickman thought about being a boy, waiting on the bank of the river with his brothers and watching the dog run, and then fling herself into the air. He remembered how, in mid-leap, she would always twist her body, a small, unnecessary gesture, a fillip of joy to show that this impossible thing was easy for her. Madame Lavon said, "But perhaps you do not understand." The magician said, "I intended only lilies." Hans Ickman closed his eyes and remembered the dog suspended in the air above the river, her white body set afire by the light of the sun. But what was the dog's name? He could not recall. She was gone, and her name was gone with her. Life was so short, so many beautiful things slipped away. Where, for instance, were his brothers now? He did not know. He could not say. Madame Lavon said, "I was crushed by an elephant." The magician said, "I intended only—" "Please," said Hans Ickman. He opened his eyes. It is important that you say what you mean to say. Time is too short. You must speak words that matter." The magician and the noblewoman were silent for a moment, and then Madame Lavon opened her mouth. She said, "But perhaps you do not understand." The magician said, "I intended only lilies." "Enough," said Hans Ickman. He took hold of Madame Lavon's chair and turned it around. "That is enough. I cannot bear to hear it any more. I truly cannot." He wheeled her away, down the long corridor and out of the prison and into the cold, dark Baltesian afternoon. "But perhaps you do not understand. I was crippled." "No," said Hans Ickman, "no." Madame Lavon fell silent, and it was in this manner that she paid her last official visit to the magician in the prison. Peter could, from the window of the attic room in the apartments Polonaise, see the turrets of the prison. He could see, too, the spire of the city's largest cathedral and the gargoyles crouched there, glowering on its ledges. If he looked out into the distance, he could see the great grand homes of the nobility high atop the hill. Below him were the twisting, turning cobblestone streets, the small shops with their crooked tiled roofs, and the pigeons who forever perched atop them, singing sad songs that did not quite begin and never truly ended. It was a terrible thing to gaze upon it all and know that somewhere beneath one of those roofs, hidden, perhaps, in some dark alley, was the very thing that he needed, wanted, and could not have. How could it be that against all odds, all expectations, all reason, an elephant could miraculously appear in the city of Baltise and then just as quickly disappear, and that he, Peter Augustus Dukeen, who needed desperately to find her, did not know, could not even begin to imagine the how or where of searching for her? Looking out over the city, Peter decided that it was a terrible and complicated thing to hope, and that it might be easier instead to despair. "Come away from the window," Vilna Lutz called to Peter. Peter held very still. He found that it was hard now for him to look at Vilna Lutz's face. "Private Dukeen," said Vilna Lutz. "Sir," said Peter without turning. "A battle is being waged," said Vilna Lutz. "A battle between good and evil. Whose side will you do battle on, Private Dukeen?" Peter turned and faced the old man. "What is this? Are you crying?" "No," said Peter, "I am not." But when he put a hand to his face, he was surprised to discover that his cheek was wet. "That is good," said Vilna Lutz. "Soldiers do not weep. At least they should not weep. It is not to be borne, the weeping of soldiers. Something is amiss in the universe when a soldier cries. Hark! Do you hear the rattle of muskets?" "I do not," said Peter. "Oh, it is cold," said the soldier. "Still, we must practice maneuvers. The marching must begin. Yes, the marching must begin." Peter did not move. "Private Dukeen, you will march. Armies must move. Soldiers must march." Peter sighed. His heart was so heavy inside him that he did not, in truth, think that he had it in him to move at all. He lifted one foot and then the other. "Higher," said Vilna Lutz. "March with purpose. March like a man. March as your father would have marched." What difference does it make if an elephant has come, Peter thought as he stood in the same place and marched without going anywhere at all. It is just some grand and terrible joke that the fortune teller has told me. My sister is not alive. There is no reason to hope. The longer he marched, the more convinced Peter became that the things were indeed hopeless, and that an elephant was a ridiculous answer to any question, but a particularly ridiculous answer to a question posed by the human heart. Okay, friends, if you like this story, please hit the thumbs up and subscribe, and I'll see you next time.